Hello, today I'm introducing Juleyka La Antigua, founder and CEO of LWC Studios, which produces 70 Million, a documentary podcast about criminal justice reform. Today, Juleyka is going to cover how to identify your niche audience, which will cover 3 topics: how to identify your listener using psychographic profiles, how to develop a creative idea for that audience, and how to maximally serve that audience with your idea. But first, let's discuss why identifying your audience is important. As we will hear Juleyka explain in just a moment, it helps to serve and showcase communities that are underrepresented or underserved.
So my vision for the company was to bring creators from the margins to tell stories how they wanted to tell stories that also centered people from the margins. That is exactly what we're doing. That vision is reflected in 70 Million, in Latina to Latina, in Feeling My Flow, in How to Talk to Mommy and Papi About Anything. And so a large percentage, 92% of our collaborators are women of color, but that's not by design, it's really by default because of the type of storytelling that we want to do.
The second reason identifying your audience is important is because your podcast is about them, not about you. Here's Juleyka to explain why.
Who's the podcast for? I don't even care what the podcast is about because that gets refined and redefined as you make it. But if the person is not clear about who they're making the podcast for, they have a 0 chance of success. If you're making a podcast for everyone, then you're not making a podcast for anyone. The first thing, and it's a hard thing to hear, is that you are not your ideal listener. It does not matter what you want to talk about, what you want your show to be about. You're not your ideal listener. What you are is your listener's biggest and best advocate. That's the role that you play as the creator. So, which is why you first have to identify who your listener is. There are 2 ways you can go right now with podcasting, which is you can make a podcast, which is a hobby, which is something that you do by yourself on the weekend. You get a couple hundred, a few thousand listeners, and you're happy because it's a passion of yours. That's fine. If you want to make money making a podcast, you absolutely have to have an audience. And the better that you define that audience, the better your chances of making money eventually with a podcast, because what advertisers will pay you for is access to that audience.
Now let's hear from Juleyka as she explains the steps for identifying your niche audience.
The first thing, think about what group of people that is, one, already digitally savvy. So that's a must, because the only way to get a podcast is through a digital something or other, your laptop, your smartphone, YouTube, etc. So you think about that. And then you think about what audience is being underserved. And then you drill down and you say, okay, well, there's this whole other swath of a few million people who would enjoy a show about personal finance, but with a POV that talks to them about it. Or there's a whole subset of, soccer fans who would enjoy a show that only focus on Latin American soccer teams. And so you figure out where is an audience that would be receptive to an idea that is smaller than the general audience. Right. That's also part of why I ask, who is your listener? Because the second question that I ask is, how are you going to get the show to them? In podcasting, it's not like a radio dial where you can just sort of scan through and the station is always there and you keep scanning. There are hundreds of thousands of podcasts. And so you've got to make sure that you put yours in front of the right audience. And the only way to do that is to determine who they are and where they are.
You recommend creating a psychographic profile of your listener.
What that does is it clarifies who is not your ideal audience. And so you don't waste time going after audiences that are not your ideal audience. And so what I mean is literally create an avatar of one listener that represents the qualities and characteristics of all the listeners. And so if you've given this person 12 qualities, it means that one of those qualities will be shared with as many listeners as you can find. And so I will tell you that the psychographic for our Latina to Latina show, she is college educated. She lives in the top 25 markets in the USA, the top 25 cities, and the secondary 50 cities. So she's urban dwelling. She comes from a large family. She's very close to her family. She's fully bilingual. She's fully bicultural. She has friends that are Latino, that are Asian, that are Black, that are white. She navigates multiple worlds. She is in the first decade of her career, most of them. And then about 30% of them are early moms. So like you and me, where our kids are under 10. And she cares about political issues. She votes. She cares about having both a work-life balance. So she'll put in, the long days when she has to, but she wants her weekends to go and hang out and have family dinner. The reason that you have one person is that from that person, she is basically your representative to her group of friends and her family. So the way that I think of our ideal listener is that she then will recommend it to her best friend, will recommend it to her colleague, will make her boyfriend listen, will make her husband listen. And so what your ideal listener is basically your PR person.
Secondly, if you don't have the two core elements, which is a good idea and a clear idea of who your audience is, you're not going to build much. And so you have to have those two essential building blocks to begin anything. And I always talk about how any creative idea in this marketplace, in the podcasting marketplace, has to be an intersection. It has to bring two forces into conversation, into continuous conversation with one another in ways that are interesting. So this cannot be a one-way street at all, because where's the tension there? Where's the creativity? Where's the intellectual elasticity that you need to sustain growth?
And then the third part is ask your audience, like quite literally ask your audience and say to them, hey, I've got this crazy idea for something I want to make with the show. What do you think? Would that work? Would you listen to that? You've got to go back to them and ask them. You've got to mock something up. You've got to present your idea, your hope, your vision to them and say, hey, what do you think? You think that this might work? And then you have to look back at your surveys and look at how your audience has deepened and how it has grown and see if there are context clues in there. For example, we knew with 70 million when we launched it that part of the commitment was to be a resource. So number one, we are open source. So everything original that we create, including our transcripts, including our resource guides, including obviously the audio, it's all open source. Anyone and everyone is welcome to use it. No licensing, no royalties, no permissions. So that was a direct welcome to anyone to iterate with our idea. What would you do with it? Are you going to use it in your documentary? Are you going to use it in your activism? Are you going to use it in your classrooms? And so very quickly after season 1, we started getting lots of emails from professors who said, oh my God, this is completely wonderful. I'm using it in my sociology class. I'm using it in my criminal justice class. I'm using it in my law classes, right? I'm using it in all of these places. And so for season 2, we thought, okay, let's complement what our community is already doing by creating annotated transcripts. And so now all of our transcripts are annotated and they have sometimes a couple of 100 links in them, leading to the resources that we cite in the reporting and to additional resources. And so there we are, expanding the definition of what 70 million can be as a podcast to now have it be a really legitimate academic resource for people who want to be able to utilize that information in their own work. And the result of that has been that, for example, Representative AOC and Senator Booker cited one of our episodes in a letter that they wrote to Congress about criminal justice report. I mean, it's really incredible. Sometimes I'm just like, how did that even happen? We've had amicus briefs to state Supreme Courts that cite our reporting. There is no way for me to even think about how I could begin to make that happen, but the community knows how to make it happen. They're the ones who are taking it, and they're the ones who are creating forward with it in ways that are really meaningful to them.
So now that you've heard Juleyka's advice today, start identifying who your audience is